It's a giving game, not a getting game, right? So, what can I bring to the party versus where's mine as just a general kind of point of reference. The other is to Shakespeare. So, to thine own self be true. So, as you are thinking about your brand, your vision, your purpose, your unique differentiator is yourself. So, bring that to service to yourself and to your team and your organization. Books like this are fantastic. They give you some guidelines and some ideas, but bring yourself to these ideas and guidelines.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kraus,
And I'm Caryl Stern.
and we are here to explore and unpack the essence, architecture, and DNA of purpose across industries, professions, relationships, and even within paradox.
So, on this podcast, we're going to unlock the stories and the journeys of our guests. We're hoping to unlock pathways to grow, to gain, and to give. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to Listen on Purpose. I'm Caryl Stern, here with my co host, Rachel Kraus. Today, we are thrilled to welcome James Turk to the show. He's an executive coach, speaker, actor, founder of the Turk Group. With more than 25 years of experience developing leaders at companies such as Spotify, Squarespace, and Goldman Sachs, James helps people move from managing tasks to truly inspiring others. His new book, right here, The Giving Game, flips traditional leadership on its head by focusing on trust, generosity, and influence. Lots of things in common, lots of things to talk about. So please welcome James Turk to the show.
Nice to be here.
Your background's really interesting to both Rachel and I. So why don't you tell your story? How do you come to do what you're doing here?
Oh, that's such a big question. So I end up here with all of you today through a series of kind of life and professional events. So I grew up in Mississippi, and I'm the youngest of seven kids. And in that, my parents were coaches, and in a large family dynamic, there's all sorts of good things, but a lot of competition and a lot of really learning how to read the room. So as I kind of grew older and was figuring out what I wanted to do professionally, I ended up in New York as a private art dealer and thought I would kind of find my fame and fortune by doing that. I moved here during the first Bush administration to just date myself a little bit, and it was a tough economy. So I ended up taking a job at Goldman Sachs, working in human resources, and I did that for a few years. Ended up in trade publishing at Random House, and then realized that human resources wasn't really for me. And my real passion was that of the stage and theater. So I had done a little bit of that as a kid and in college. And so I studied with a guy by the name of Freddie Karaman at Carnegie Hall and was working my day job in human resources and studying acting at night. And then decided I wanted to give that a try, and then kind of set out to do that. Left my corporate job and was pursuing the acting and had a little bit of success with some indie films and a couple of soap operas, and then started doing some training and development around the edges just to support the acting. And after a couple of years, I wasn't getting my big break, so I decided, like, you know what, this is really my passion, is kind of helping people, being of service, and bringing a little bit of kind of energy to this idea of professional development. So that's what got me into the space of learning and development. And really, the last 25 years, I worked through other consulting companies, mastered the craft, and became a master facilitator, executive coach. And then about 15 years ago, I went out on my own and started my own consulting company, and then had this book percolating inside me for quite some time. And I was like, you know what? If I were to take all of these random experiences and this idea of giving back, what would that look like? And there we have the book.
What I was fascinated by as I started to read up on you
Yeah.
was the whole interweave, though, of the giving back and leadership. I think when people think about leadership, they think about you give of yourself, but not necessarily in the way that you describe it. Give us some insight into how you think about
So
leadership.
the tagline would be, it's a giving game, not a getting game. So if I can approach my leadership as a way to kind of think about how I can help my team, how I can help individuals, how I can help the organization, in so doing, typically I would help myself. So this idea of really kind of putting their needs first and helping them develop is usually a good driver of this idea of just employee engagement. Dan Goldman talks a lot in his model for emotional intelligence about this idea of social awareness. And my favorite part of the social awareness is this idea of service orientation. So I have a good sense for what's happening around me with my team and with individuals, not so that I can deep scan them, although that might be very interesting, but really so I can help them. So in the context of our work, what do they need? So if I can kind of really think about that, typically I'm going to get the best performance out of them, and then that's going to help me really get the best performance out of myself.
Well, certainly giving has a palindromic effect.
Yeah,
So what you give is what you obviously end up
absolutely.
receiving in return.
Totally.
And how have you seen that, and specifically with the confluence of your theater background in particular, because there's also a certain amount of reciprocity and palindromic effects on stage.
Absolutely.
And how have you seen that, and how has that been of influence
So
in your
absolutely.
work?
So as I work with clients, both in like a selling capacity and just in coaching, just taking chances and being like just authentic and just being vulnerable. And rather than pretending like I'm someone with this particular expertise, I'll go in and I'll kind of show my cards and just say like, I'm not really quite sure how to handle this, but I want to work with you and see if we can do it together. And just by kind of, choosing to be of service by being authentic and vulnerable usually creates a lot of psychological safety, a lot of trust, which is really the bedrock for not only good acting, but just good life, right?
When you work with those, though, that you're coaching,
Mhm.
I would imagine you get resistance in the beginning. Tell us about that.
Well, so it depends. So sometimes they bring me in when either things are really good and they want to invest in you and it's very positive, or there's an issue and they need to kind of course correct pretty quickly. So when I have run into resistance, usually I call it out head on. And back to being the youngest of seven, I have pretty good social awareness, so I can read the tea leaves and understand exactly what's happening. So I'll call it out directly and just say like I'm sensing some hesitation. I want to give you an opportunity to just to talk about it. And let me relate to you. If I were in your shoes and someone like me sat down with you, I would probably feel the same way. I'm not saying you do, but I want to kind of create some space for them to kind of feel okay about it and then also talk about it. And if I can get them talking about it, typically I can uncover what's really happening. Usually it's fear of some sort. They think I'm going to come in and either judge them or report out on them, something that's not favorable. So if I can give them an opportunity to actually talk about that, chances are we can solve it and then move on to actually trying to help them.
Do you think some of that is generational? I mean, I know of like for what I think is our generation. um,
Excuse me? No.
yeah, maybe not, but I think,
Yeah.
um, the leader was here,
Mhm.
the troops were
Yeah.
here, and obviously, I think that the whole idea of servant leadership in particular, but the team building, that whole concept was a newer trend for some of us in kind of bringing us back to here.
Well, so the world has definitely changed. So when I was growing up in corporate America, there was hierarchy, there was structure, there were silos by design, and you would basically kind of work within your vertical, and you would stay there and not necessarily kind of get into other parts of the business's affairs. But now most organizations run pretty flat, and there's an expectation with that there's higher degrees of really cross-functional collaboration. So people just being willing to kind of work kind of peer to peer, team to team, and then to actually make things happen, which is very different than having like positional authority or, some type of like budgetary authority. Now the expectation is that people just need to be able to work together and then frame things up in a way that's compelling and invites the spirit of wanting to actually work together versus I have to work together. So for us as a practice, what we try to do in the spirit of the giving game is, I want to create an environment where people are going to want to partner with me because they want to and it's interesting versus they have to.
Mm.
Compliance will only get me so far, but if I can get real buy-in and real engagement and a real motivation to work together, typically better things are going to happen.
And do you find that there's any commonality or any through line or consistency? And as Carol mentioned, is whether it's age group or whether it's a certain demographic, it's a certain geography. Are there certain thematics that you've picked up in your work?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that like I'm very careful to kind of put people in silo or to buckets or to stereotype them. I think there are certainly there's evidence to suggest that, but I also think that there are people who have been working for a long time who make continuous improvement a priority and are very open to new ideas. But then there are certainly some who've worked for a long time who are very kind of bought into old ways of thinking. And depending on what it is, we'll have to get in there and just try to help them kind of see something differently. The classic is the people newer to the workforce or, don't want to be constricted by rules and regulation. They don't see the value of the fact that like you want to have some type of like guardrails and some definition and they'll perform better. Conversely, people who have been working for a long time, are a little reluctant to have like, ideation or innovation or do things differently. They're a little bit more risk averse because they've worked for a long time. So often our work is to try to like, bring the best of both of those together and find something in the middle that people can kind of stand behind and feel comfortable with.
And how do you compensate for everyone wants to be the leader?
Well, that's a good question. So everyone wants to be the leader, usually finding out why. right? So is it positional authority? Is it stature? Is it money? So really kind of uncovering what that is. And then defining, we talk a lot about this idea of, both visible leadership and leading from your seat. The leadership really has nothing to do with a title, but it's really how you behave. And are you the person that people are naturally coming to? And usually those people are the ones that are giving feedback. They're acknowledging when people do good work. They're bringing some enthusiasm and some, energy to the work. So when people, everyone wants to be a leader. So finding out why, and then, creating a space that everyone gets to be a leader in their own way, and there's enough room for everybody.
No,
So,
I just think that what's interesting for me in this moment of leadership is because I teach leadership in a graduate program. We raised a generation where everybody wanted their child to be the leader. So you should be captain of the team, you should be president of your class, you should do the presentation.
And get a trophy.
And you get a trophy, yes. And we failed to give value to fellowship, only leadership. And I think it's part of why we are where we are
yeah.
right now. So I've been really kind of examining
Mm.
how do you give credibility to the fellowship?
That's a great question. So I think that just, just purpose, right? So, we look at Dan Pink's work. McKinsey did a study post-pandemic in 2021 where they looked at really what was the value proposition, what were employees really looking for, and this idea of purpose was big. And so if you are just a worker among workers, there's innate value in that, and just really as long as it's aligning with their individual purpose. So they want to be like a mom, or they want to kind of work on a side gig, and how their work in the business or in the organization, how that's serving kind of that individual purpose. Hopefully, we can align it with the team purpose and the organization purpose, but really just making sure that they have that sense of the work that they're doing. It's not only is it self fulfilling, they can be very successful doing it. The organization values it, but also it can help serve what their individual kind of sense of meaning and purpose might be. But it's interesting, just with everyone being a winner and a trophy, we spend more of our time working with managers who are leading those people. And like,
Mhm.
I've been here for 6 months. I'm ready for my promotion. Put me in. And just, and it's tough for leaders because they have to unwind a lot of that kind of, a lot of the, thinking that's happened for years around like just showing up is enough. And, once people get into the workforce, like the rules are a bit different.
Right.
Right.
And when you think about the moment before the workforce
Yep.
or the 2 moments before the workforce and what types of values, culturally in terms of integrity, there's a ground up that begins like well before people make their way into the workforce. So in your work, what would you say are important values that you would want to inform the minute before or the 2 minutes before people are coming into the work?
So I think team sports of some sort. So I think there's just something happens when you are just part of a team, and even if you can't stand the coach and you're losing, it's a shared experience, and you're kind of having that together. That creates a sense of community, and just being able to be tolerant of other people, which I think is really helpful. I also just think that this idea of kind of celebrating other people winning, and this idea of being grateful for your third or fourth place while still honoring like the system. Like not everyone can be a winner. And why did they win first or second? Well, maybe they worked a little harder. And maybe, it's in, and that's okay. But let's find your area where you can be more likely to get a first or a second. So this blanket, like, you're a winner just because you show up is like understandable, but I think it just reinforces behaviors that are challenging for them once they become adults.
So when you enter a workplace, let's take our industry. You come into a financial institution, which is a highly competitive, make the deal, win the deal
Mhm.
business, and you want to create a culture of purpose.
Mhm.
How do you start?
That's tough. So especially if the primary kind of motive is kind of, profit and, making money. So understanding like the culture of the organization. So why are they serving clients? Is it institutional investors? Is it individual investors? So really understanding kind of like within kind of the financial market, like where are we playing? And then understanding kind of what value that is bringing. So kind of the more macro, and then pulling it into the individual to think about how they can help the team succeed and help like the desk do well if they're a trader, and then kind of understanding like the different layers, and then pulling them back to themselves, like whatever reasons they chose to be in this industry versus something else, then how it all fits together. But it's challenging. So I'll be going to Chicago for a client tomorrow, and it's a young fintech company, and they're just the nature of it. Everyone's incented and rewarded for individual performance.
Mm.
So trying to like create some type of we're all in this together can be challenging.
I would imagine it
Yeah.
is. So, Okay, so I get hired tomorrow by this fintech
Yeah,
company.
yeah,
It's my first
yeah.
45 days. What do I need to do?
So you need to, in the first couple weeks, think about like really what are your key responsibilities. So what's the job description? What are you responsible for? Who are the key stakeholders as far as like your dependencies? If you're managing a team, really understanding kind of who the team is, both kind of collectively, what's the reputation, who are they individually, what are some of the team norms? So do you have one-on-ones? Do you have a team meeting? First couple weeks is just really kind of getting the lay of the land, really aligning yourself with your boss just to make sure that you have clarity around exactly kind of what's what. If you are replacing someone, did they leave on good terms? If not, any lessons learned that you could, take advantage of. And then once you kind of have that, you're in pretty good shape to start kind of getting your bearings and start adding value, which the whole key we focus on the first 45 days is really thinking about ways that you can just get your bearings so that you can start adding value as quickly as possible versus the tendency is to kind of put your head down and pretend like you have all the answers and not know that you should be asking a lot of questions. And all of a sudden you're 6 months in and you have lots of questions and, it's a little awkward for you after that time.
Can you share a story of somebody who did it well?
Somebody who did it well. So digital media. So we spent a lot of time at the Voxes and BuzzFeeds of the world. The high growth environment, 10 years, they were growing like wildfire. So I had someone who was an editor, just individual contributor. And then she was promoted to being a kind of a senior editor, which had and having four juniors report to her. So for her, that, change from individual contributor to manager was a big shift. For most of us, that's the biggest transition we're going to make in our career. So for her, she just kind of realized the magnitude of the shift, and she was really successful as an editor managing herself. But she just read up and just through some training programs and some coaching that I was doing with her, she really understood what the differences were between the two roles. So she needed to figure out how to give feedback, how to run a one-on-one, how to run a team meeting, and so she was able to do it pretty quickly. A couple of missteps along the way, but she was able to very quickly kind of create a climate of high performance. Her editors loved her, and they did some really wonderful work at the organization.
And what's been one of the most kind of unexpected key learnings for you in this work? Like something you didn't expect to see or something surprising?
Probably the category would be that people can actually change. I think I had a bit of a bias that you kind of had what you had. And I was working with a CEO who, had done really well and was kind of promoted through like the system because he was this like, the bit type A and just, was very kind of financially driven. And I had a kind of a very strong point of view that, I wondered whether he would ever be able to actually kind of motivate and inspire like the organization. He could run the organization and it was highly profitable, but I wondered if he could ever kind of really bring the energy to it. And to my surprise, he did. I'd like to think that I had something to do with it, but he found it within himself and he understood like really what the new role required. And it was just a good lesson for me to realize that, it's never too late to be able to like learn something new and be able to kind of succeed in role, kind of despite how long you've done it or despite how long you've done it a certain way.
And do you think, like, just to come back to where we started a little bit with the acting, obviously, I remember being in a play that I was in because the lead at the very, very last minute could not fulfill his obligation. And just before I walked on stage, one of my mentors, my acting teacher, said to me, just remember, you don't forget lines, you just don't care to say them. And if you stand there and act that way, somebody will feed you the line.
Right.
And he was right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
was a fake it till you make it.
yeah, yeah.
Um, how does that interrelate with like purpose and vision then?
So I think it's understanding that it is kind of a work in progress. So we do a lot with like purpose vision, both with the executive teams when they're thinking about the organization, where they go. Usually when we're working with executive teams, there's two questions. Who are you all as a team? Like how do you see yourself? What is your purpose as a team? Why do you exist? And then how do you want to do that in the context of this organization? So when we think about kind of doing that, it rarely is it kind of finished after one session, but just directionally, kind of where do you see yourself going? I've been consulting for a long time and acting for a long time. And usually the edges are pretty soft, so nothing is absolute. So, we think about vision, we think about purpose, and it's directional. So, what do we feel our purpose is right now? Understanding that it can change. And usually by softening it a little bit, it allows people to get more comfortable in the process, especially if they feel that it can, not change completely, but it can evolve in time as they get better, as they get more mature.
So where my head goes on that question. So my father was one of the associate producers of the Fantastics. So I grew up like back of house, backstage, but half an hour before showtime, house rules, union rules that actors were getting into character. My dad was always like, "You can't be back here; they're getting into character." That whole concept of kind of creating moments,
Mm,
pre and sometimes post,
yeah.
to be able to give ourselves the time and the space to allow ourselves to immerse into whatever activity, meeting, development team that we're going into. How have you applied kind of that thinking
All
towards your work?
all the time. So we talk about this idea of executive presence and how you can be authentic. So whether it's a kind of a formal presentation or a speech, just helping them approach it as if it's a role. So, pen to paper, like, what are you trying to solve for here? I always ask the question, like, what are you hoping people are going to walk away feeling? So they're walking out of the room. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? Okay, that's what we're working toward. And just have them think about, okay, what's the introduction? We focus like on the importance of the first like 30 seconds.
Mhm.
People are formulating their opinion of someone very quickly. And, what are you saying? What are you doing? How are you? What's your body language? That really is going to be important. And then from that point forward, just kind of honing in on some key talking points. And then we encourage them just to get out of their own way. Because, and I was telling them, like, you don't want to sound like me, you want to sound like yourself, but you need to kind of understand exactly what are your key points. And you want to know it well enough to where you can just basically put your notes to the side and just relax and be authentic. That's what people are going to connect to. It's the authenticity. If you screw up, even better. Right, because that's something people could relate to. Versus, hey, the trap is I've got to do this perfectly. If I don't do it perfect, people are going to be looking for me to mess up. Like, no, like make a mistake. People are going to love that and they're going to align behind you.
My experience with the leaders that I've worked with over many years is always that they're really good at defining the what, but not the how.
Mm,
So I can set my personal goals by my metrics. I've got
good.
to sell more, close more deals, show a bigger profit, whatever the more is.
See.
Very little time spent usually in corporate America on the how.
Yeah.
What's it going to feel like? Why are we doing this? And how are we going to do
Yeah.
it?
Well, I think the how's so important because the what's usually pretty evident. Like we're looking to increase sales or larger market share, but how we're going to do it is like so important because it's really it's a tenet of psychological safety. People need definition. They need to know how we make decisions, how we disagree with each other. Just how even with talking about the different generations, how do we act professionally? So what does that actually look like? Like it's not okay to ghost someone in a professional
Mm,
context. You need to actually get back to them. So kind of creating the how, and we'll often when we're talking about either accountabilities or just team dynamics, actually defining those. Usually, organizations would have like values or principles, which are defined, and usually that gives some definition around the how, and which is really how do we want to work together? How do we want to treat each other? And from my perspective, that's so important because if we don't have that, you end up spending a lot of time just on the negative consequences of those things not being defined. Backstabbing,
mm.
people not sharing their ideas, people leaving, all those things.
So you wrote a book.
I did write a book.
Yeah. And The Giving Game. Why should I read the book?
If you are someone who is thinking about going into a leadership position, but you're not really quite sure what it entails, or you've been recently promoted and you're like, okay, this is great. I'm not really quite sure what to do. Or you've been in a leadership position for quite some time and you never actually had the training. This book is meant to give you really what a successful first year might look like. So it's going to walk through the first 45 days, which is really first couple of weeks, as I said earlier, or just to understand like what's the lay of the land. Weeks 3 and 4, who are the key stakeholders and vendors. Weeks 5 and 6, vision, mission, purpose. Once you have those things, then you can go into really navigating change, coaching, providing feedback. It doesn't answer all the questions, but this is really an opportunity for you to see like what are some of the most important things that I, as a people leader, need to be able to do. So if that's you, this book is for you.
First book?
First book.
So what did it feel like the day you saw it in print?
I was it was very it's been an interesting journey. It's like I feel like this is like my child. So because it was a lot of work to write it, and then once we finally went through the printing process and actually had the copies, it was pretty exciting. And but then I was exhausted by it. It was a little anticlimactic because there had been so much work to that point. Let it rest for a couple of months, and then I started doing the press tour and all those things. So now I'm kind of, I'm enjoying it more now than ever. And now I'm getting great feedback. So people are like reaching out to me saying like, I read the book, super helpful. Clients are reading it. So it's been very gratifying in that regard.
When I wrote my first book and they put it in a window at Barnes and Noble, and I took a lawn chair and I just sat there and I like watched people
Yes.
look at my book.
Yeah.
So it's really fun, really, really fun.
So, what we like to do is to give our listeners a swag bag
Okay.
filled with all sorts of goodies and fun, either pearls of wisdom or anything you would like to impart, and to for our listeners to include in their swag bag. What would you like to share?
So two things. So one, I said earlier, so it's a giving game, not a giving game, right? So what can I bring to the party versus where's mine as just a general kind of point of reference. The other is to Shakespeare. So to thine own self be true. So as you are thinking about your brand, your vision, your purpose, your unique differentiator is yourself. So bring that to service to yourself and to your team and your organization. Books like this are fantastic. They give you some guidelines and some ideas, but bring yourself to these ideas and guidelines.
That's great. I like that very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it. It's
Really
great to be here.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.
Thanks so much for joining us. Listen on Purpose is a series as part of Kindred Cast from Kindred Media and Audiation, with the phenomenal music by Rachel's 10-year-old son, Noam Kraus.
If you like this episode, please make sure to subscribe to Kindred Cast wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review letting us know what you think. We are your hosts, Rachel Kraus.
And Caryl Stern,
Thank you for listening.
and find your purpose.